everyone, and welcome to this session. Today we're going to be talking about hyper-casual prototyping and how we can minimize efforts in order to obtain the maximum results. So we'll be going through a few tips and tricks and especially good practices in order to increase your efficiency with hyper-casual prototyping and hopefully increase your hit ratio afterwards. So this is a pre-recorded session. So I'm currently live with you guys on the chat. So if you have any questions during the talk, feel free to write them and I will be answering them as fast as possible and as relevant way as possible as well. Cool. So let's get started. The main problem we have nowadays in hyper-casual prototyping, and I think most of you guys are quite familiar with this, is the fact that prototypes constantly get rejected after testing. Results are not good enough, and you just need to start working on a new one. And obviously, that's kind of obviously a waste of time and efforts. There is a frustration coming obviously as well from the fact that we spend so much time, as I mentioned, on these prototypes and the financial waste that there is behind it as well, as those prototypes will most of the time not be used at all. And this brings me to my third point as well, which is often we work on all kind of prototypes and we don't really have very strong applied learnings from those failed tests. So you end up having a sea of prototypes that you tested, all different from one another without a real, a path or coherence between them, and you don't really know what to take from those failures. So we're going to be tackling a bit these issues and how to potentially at least partially solve them. Like a small premise that I would like to give on this presentation, I'm not going to give you guys the secret recipe to making a hit, but again, as I was mentioning earlier, the idea is to increase the chances of getting one. In order to do that, we're going to be looking mainly at how to focus on the right things at the right time, and in that same mindset to fail faster and learn from it. And again, the objective is going to be slightly more granular than just increase your chances, is to, for every new game that you will be testing, on average, keep decreasing your CPI, aka improve your marketability, and also increase the average engagement that you get for each new prototype that you will be getting. So again, it's not going to necessarily decrease in a completely steep curve, but it's more the idea of adjusting always to little by little to better prototypes overall, again, in terms of marketability and in terms of engagement. Moving on to the ideation, which is a fundamental part of hyper-casual prototyping. You need to start a new prototype, right? And the first question that you're going to ask yourself is where to begin. And I think that here as well, this is actually a very essential moment of your prototyping, if not the most important, and where you want to make sure that you take the right decisions again and focus on the right things to make sure to increase your chances. So first of all, you must have heard these principles or this framework of ideation in many different ways, in many different words. But the idea is that if your game isn't fresh, and by this I mean new, innovative, satisfying, rewarding, relatable, and catchy, and on top of that, gamifiable and snackable and monetizable. Sorry for that. You should not basically start a prototype. Again, these are all the factors that will make sure that your users stop crawling their feed on their phone and basically click on your game and download it, and afterwards to keep playing it. So these are essential traits and motivations that games need to have in order to work, especially in the prototype, in the hyper-casual world. So again, fresh, new, innovative. As you can imagine, if you're scrolling your phone, if you don't have something that looks new enough for you to just stop on it, if you've seen it over and over, there's no reason to download the game. Same for playing it afterwards. You still want to find out about it while you're playing. Satisfying and rewarding, obviously, we know about this part. It has to have something that satisfies your brain in some kind of way, whether it's a puzzle mechanic or it's an ASMR game. Relatable and catchy. Again, today more than ever, we talk about TikTokable games, this kind of stuff. You need to have themes that talk to people, whether it's superheroes, TV shows, or like strong themes in general that people relate to and are excited about. And finally, this is still an important point. The game needs to be gamifiable and snackable. By this, I mean that you should be able to make short, fast levels that are fun to play and monetizable as well, which is a quite important point, which we'll be discussing later. But a game that has more chances to trigger, especially word videos in its gameplay, is more likely to succeed. So moving on to my next slide. Yeah, here you go. So talking about ideation is not only coming up completely with new ideas, but sometimes as well be able to use iterations of your previous work or of what's on the market, especially your previous work, since you have all the metrics on it, and you know, basically you have data to know how to proceed on those specific themes and the concept that you worked on. So let's take a very basic example. I have a game with a flipping mechanic. The retention day one is excellent, but the CPI is very bad. And on the other side, I have a game with hairstyles as a theme, like a hair salon, this kind of thing. And the retention day one is bad, CPI is good, right? So combine those things, right? Like if here it's an illustration and it's a very straightforward and simple way of saying that, but you'll see that you can get way more learnings from your games than you might think and reuse that. So whenever you have something good, like a retention day one or a CPI from a game, make sure that you are using that to some extent in your next prototype or in the next ones to come. Again, like it's very important, as I was saying earlier, to really be in this iteration mindset to keep improving your game over and over by using what worked and by hopefully not using what didn't work. In the same mindset, you can capitalize a lot on what you learned on your games. So every information should really be saved with very good practices and methods and reused where it applies afterwards. So this applies to, as mentioned, to like information regarding like what works in terms of CPI or works in terms of retention. This is a bit the broad view, but then inside those metrics, behind those metrics, there is specific reasons to why it was the case, right? So it might be the assets you used, it might be the art style, it might be many things. And like within those things as well, you would have the camera. So here as an example, we put like, for example, a stickman, a specific stickman with specific shape and specific animations worked well. Let's reuse that. You have specific color scheme that worked. Let's see a pink sky versus a blue sky, for example, in a runner. Let's make sure you're using that as well. And same with camera position. If some specific camera position works, let's reuse that. If you then test a new one and you see it works, that's going to be your new standard in terms of camera position for a runner, for example. So really, that needs to be the mindset, and there's many efficient ways of properly saving this information. So if it's assets, it's by creating libraries. If it's information, it's even just by writing it down in a well-organized thing that whenever you're starting a new prototype, you can just go through a checklist of things and make sure that you applied all the right things at the right spots. So yeah, like this is essential. I mean, many of you guys already use templates, for example, of game for runners, for other types of games, and this is exactly what you should be doing for every type of information. So not only mechanic assets, but also pure information, level length, rhythm, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, so this for this part. Moving on to the next one. So this can maybe change a bit from publisher to publisher, and sometimes even from publishing manager to publishing manager. But I think that the first most important thing to focus still nowadays when working on hyper casual games is CPI, right? I think we're nowadays everyone is adapting a little bit and being more flexible on this aspect, but it is still very important to look at marketability when testing a game. Otherwise, it might just be impossible to scale it one day. And working for days and months on a game that ultimately cannot scale is a waste of time and of resources in general. So again, I think that the idea with CPI is to try to test it as soon as possible and to see if there is potential to keep working on the game. No need to be extremely strict on CPI and like, you know, if there's 1 cent difference to not work on it from your objective. But still, it's important to validate it in the beginning to make sure you can keep working on the game and that it makes sense in terms of resource management. First of all, one important thing is CPI is the focus, right? So the prototype per se is not that important. The most important with prototypes is to have them accepted by the store mainly, to be able to test the game and have downloads on it. And so your main focus when you're testing CPI should be especially the ads that you will be showing to users and the ASO, which will have an impact on your conversion rates. The ASO itself doesn't have to be extremely curated, as you will still be looking at it. You still have the data on it when you're testing your game. So if you have a 50% conversion, you can expect that with some extra work on it, for example, you would be able to ultimately increase conversion and decrease CPI. Again, as I was saying, like the build per se, the game is not that important in this stage. It's important to spend more time on testing different variations, especially in terms of ads. So for example, your game is going to have one camera angle, but then in the actual ads, you can have a lot of different ones. You can put different characters, you can put different colors, all this kind of stuff. I think it's very encouraged to test as many as possible when you're testing CPI, just to make sure that you find the best possible solution in that sense. And focus on engagement and the actual build only later on when you're on the second stage and you already validated the marketability of your game. So again, as I was saying, like spending too much time before CPI can be time consuming on the game. And even adding multiple levels is not fundamental. If you have something with one level or a couple of levels looping and it's good enough to be accepted on the store, that's good enough to go. CPI will not be impacted by the content inside the game. The only exception being if your game is, for example, extremely broken or something like this, there might be bad reviews, which would impact conversion. But except this specific scenario, it should not happen. So the only scenario where I would encourage to potentially add more levels is only if you have very well pre-made templates, for example, a runner with already some levels done, and it's literally, you know, like a copy paste for you guys. Then go ahead and do it. But otherwise, if it's something that you need to be doing tailor-made every time, limit yourself to the minimum necessary. Moving on, to LTV. So let's say you have a good CPI, so great news, and you now want to be focusing on building the LTV for your game, right? As the very basic equation of hyper casual that we all know is basically, you know, LTV minus CPI to make profit. What we're writing here, that as gameplay is king and monetization is King Kong, is a very important concept in my opinion, as I feel like we tend to think about prototyping as we're making the game and building retention and building playtime and this kind of stuff, and looking at those metrics specifically, which I don't think we should too much. They are relevant and they do show engagement of your game and it's important, but ultimately they don't have a direct correlation with monetization potential. So if you have as a simple example, if you have a retention of 20%, but you're able to show 10 interstitials to your users on your day zero, for example, then at the end of the day, we don't really care how much your retention is, right? What we mean by that is that like gameplay is very important, but monetization is even more important. So don't focus on those metrics that simply look at gameplay potential, like retention and playtime. They're, as I was saying, they're very important, and they're very clear indication of the playability and the general enjoyment that people get from your game. But there might be missing another area, which is monetization, which is extremely important, especially in more modern and more hybrid, hyper-casual games, where reward videos play an extremely important role in as well as IAP. And so you want to make sure that those are integrated very organically in your game. So there's a general bit a misconception, I think, when we're developing games. You will hear often things such as, okay, we worked on the gameplay and it's looking good. Now we're going to be integrating ads, and we're going to expect a decrease in general in the engagement. Well, hopefully it's still going to be good enough. So I don't think that engagement and monetization should be working in opposite directions. I'm trying to do the best I can with the gameplay and make something that is cool to play, and then monetization is going to go and hurt it, but hopefully not too much, right? I think it's the exact opposite. You should be thinking about gameplay as a way to fuel your monetization. So you want to create a game that is engaging and that creates an experience that will put your players in a position where they're happy to watch a reward video, or they feel it's fair for them to watch an interstitial, etc., or even better, if they are convinced by your experience and want to go for internal purchases. This is a very key point, in my opinion, in the way we need to develop games nowadays to be gameplay oriented. It's extremely important, but gameplay, again, is not an opposite force to monetization. It's something that should go in the same direction. And then again, you pass the first step of CPI, you pass the second step of LTV. That's going well. And then what's next, right? Your game is good enough to be launched. That's incredible news. And starting from there, you want to potentially, keep working on that game and get some good revenue and keep improving it in the long term. And at the same time, you want to make sure that you potentially keep working on new prototypes. This is hyper casual, and I think that's one of the very interesting points for a studio is that should be able to work on old games, but also new ones, and be able to reuse your experience you got the response you received from previous projects, and also have this creative freedom of keep working on new projects, which is, in my opinion, and I think for many studios, something that is sometimes tiring, again, because you try many things, but being able to work on multiple hit games is extremely motivating at the same time. So again, as I was saying, you need to find this balance between past and future hits is very important. And in that sense, you have to think your live ops in the same direction, right? You want to make sure that you get the most possible from your past games, while having as well the potential to increase even more your revenues, your team, your capabilities, with efficient live ops that are aimed in the right way and don't take 100% of your time, right? So some of the most important points are to always start with no-brainers when you're doing live ops. So I think that there are specific things that should be added to every game, such as a subscription. If it's not too invasive, it's going to be a plus. If it doesn't bother user experience, but for those users who are interested in having subscription, they can have it easily, and it's not too development heavy to implement. So that's an example. Or another one would be ASO updates for seasonality. It, generally speaking, almost always shows good results. So it's always good to keep testing new icons and new screenshots here and there, depending on the season, That's in general something that is recommended, and usually again doesn't take too much time, and is always pretty much worth it. And then again, if you're doing like more, like steps that are like tests that you might not be sure 100% with the results, it's good to go baby steps over huge steps. So just to give you a small example, if you're thinking, for example, of adding a meta gameplay to your runner game, let's say, right? And obviously meta gameplay is development heavy compared to other types of updates. So in that case, you will be going potentially for very long development. And before doing that, there are ways as well to know if it's actually worth adding to your game. And in which form. So for example, a very simple thing you could be doing is to add a button or like a small UI UX experience for users to see if they would be interested in that meta. You add that in the game and you see if people are engaging with it. If they do, you know that people might be interested actually in having something deeper than that. Or if you don't want to go that light and if you want to find something that is relevant anyway, even just having like the beginning of a meta, something very short, just like a couple of, some house to upgrade with a couple of things. And you want to see if people like that, you see the engagement over that, and you will know if it's worth going more in depth with this idea. Again, quite obvious, but always very important to keep in mind to really A/B test at each and every step of your live ops. It's extremely important. And that's also why it's important to work with good A/B testing tools to make sure that you can do that efficiently and with good results. Cool. So I think we reached the end of my presentation. If there is any extra questions, I should still be there in the chat with you guys for a little longer. And otherwise, thank you very much for being with me today. And I wish you all a very nice day and end of the event as well. Bye. Thank you, everyone.